Hey guys. Tonight we find ourselves standing on a quiet street in Hiroshima on the morning of August 6, 1945. The air is already warm. Cicadas buzzing in the trees like tiny engines warming up for the day. You're walking to work, or perhaps to school, adjusting your collar, thinking about rice rations and the ordinary inconveniences of wartime life. The sky is impossibly clear, so blue it almost feels staged. And I'm going to be honest with you, if you had to survive what's coming next without any warning, you probably wouldn't last very long. I say that gently. History is not subtle today. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You walk past wooden houses lining the street. Their sliding doors open to catch what little breeze the morning offers. Hiroshima in 1945 is a military and industrial hub. Yes, but it's also a living city of families, markets, trams, and schoolchildren. Roughly 350,000 people live here at the time. Though wartime evacuations have shifted numbers constantly. You hear the distant hum of an aircraft engine overhead. That alone isn't unusual. Air raid sirens have become part of daily rhythm during the war. But today, there is no sustained alarm. Only a single American B-29 bomber, the Enola Gay, flying high above at approximately 31,000 feet. It's so high that most people barely notice. A lesser-known detail, Hiroshima had been largely spared from previous large-scale bombings during the war. Some residents quietly wondered why. There were theories, strategic importance, weather patterns, even rumors of it being preserved for political reasons. Historians still debate the full reasoning behind target selection priorities in the months leading up to August 1945. You pause briefly to glance upward. The sky looks peaceful. You squint, but the plane is little more than a silver speck. If you're being honest, you're more concerned about being late than about that distant engine. It's almost comical how ordinary it feels. Like worrying about missing a bus while history is preparing to rewrite physics. At 8:15 a.m., everything changes. There is a flash, brighter than anything you have ever seen. Not like lightning, not like sunlight. It is instantaneous and overwhelming, as though the sun itself has descended into the city. The atomic bomb, later nicknamed Little Boy, detonates approximately 600 meters above the city. In that split second, temperatures at the center reach unimaginable levels. But from where you stand, what you feel first is the light. You instinctively turn away, raising an arm to shield your eyes. For a fraction of a moment, shadows burn into walls and pavement. In fact, one of the most haunting historical details is that certain shadows, of railings, ladders, even human figures, were permanently imprinted onto stone surfaces by the intensity of the blast. The light was so powerful that it etched absence into matter itself. And then comes the shock wave. It strikes like an invisible wall, knocking you off your feet. Windows shatter inward, roof tiles scatter, the ground trembles with a deep, concussive force. You are thrown against wood and dust and debris. The world roars, and then, oddly, falls into a strange muffled quiet. You lie still for a moment, ears ringing, The air is thick with dust and splintered wood. You try to understand what just happened. Earthquake, bombing raid, something else. The event itself is well known. Hiroshima becomes the first city in history to be targeted with a nuclear weapon in warfare. Yet in that moment, you don't have that vocabulary. You only have confusion. You sit up slowly. The skyline looks wrong. Buildings that stood moments ago are fractured or flattened. Fires begin flickering in multiple directions. People emerge from collapsed doorways. Stunned, silent, faces coated in gray powder. A lesser-known fact: many survivors initially described the light as magnesium-like or compared it to a camera flash magnified beyond comprehension. It was so sudden that some believed a photographic plate had exploded overhead. You rise unsteadily. Your first instinct is not analysis. It is search. You call out for family, for co-workers, for anyone who answers. Historians still debate how many people died instantly versus in the hours and days following due to injuries and radiation exposure. Estimates vary, complicated by incomplete wartime records. But what remains undisputed is that the scale of destruction was unprecedented. You take a step forward. Your legs tremble. The street you walked moments ago is barely recognizable. The tram lines are twisted. Telephone poles lean at unnatural angles. The familiar has become abstract. And yet, you are alive. That realization settles heavily. Not relief. Not yet. Just awareness. A strange, almost surreal thought crosses your mind. You had been thinking about breakfast. About ordinary tasks. It feels absurd now, like worrying about a misplaced shoe during an earthquake. But that's how history works. It interrupts routine without apology. You move carefully through debris. Calling names again. Smoke begins rising thicker now. Small fires crackle in wooden beams. Somewhere, someone is crying out for water. The sky above remains blue, clear, unchanged. And you, standing amid dust and confusion, do not yet understand that the invisible danger, the radiation released in that detonation, has already begun its quiet work. For now, you only know this: your city has been split into before and after. And you are standing exactly on the line. You are still blinking when the wind arrives. Not a breeze, not even a storm, a wall of pressure that seems to shove the air itself sideways. The shock wave rolls through the streets with a force that feels both distant and intimate. As though the sky has clapped its hands directly above you. You're lifted, not gracefully, not heroically, just abruptly. Your shoulder hits splintered wood. Your cheek scrapes against rough pavement. Dust fills your mouth. For a moment, there is no sound at all. Just a deep ringing inside your head. Like someone struck a massive bell and you're standing inside it. The atomic bomb detonated roughly 600 meters above the city. And within seconds, the blast wave radiated outward faster than any storm you've ever imagined. Windows shattered up to miles away. Roofs collapsed. Entire wooden homes folded inward like paper lanterns caught in a sudden gust. A lesser-known detail: the explosion generated a pressure wave strong enough to register on instruments across the globe. Yet on the ground, what you notice first is the silence after impact. A strange, hollow pause. You push yourself up slowly. The street is no longer a street. It's debris, scattered beams, cracked tile, fragments of daily life tossed into chaos. A bicycle lies twisted beside you. A wooden sign you passed moments ago is now broken in half. You touch your face and feel warmth. Blood, sweat, dust. It's hard to tell. Everything is coated in gray. The most widely known historical fact of this moment is that an estimated tens of thousands of people died almost instantly from the blast and heat. But you do not see numbers. You see fragments, neighbors, strangers, shapes moving through smoke. You stagger forward, calling a name that dissolves in the thick air. Your voice sounds unfamiliar, hoarse and distant to your own ears. And then the fires begin. Wooden houses ignite easily. Hiroshima's architecture, like many Japanese cities of the time, relied heavily on timber. Fire spreads not as isolated pockets, but as a growing, unified front. Historians still debate the exact temperature levels reached at ground zero and how heat distribution varied by distance and structure type. What remains clear is that within minutes, parts of the city become a landscape of flames. You glance upward instinctively. Above the smoke, a rising column begins to form, a swelling cloud climbing into the sky. At this stage, you do not know the term, mushroom cloud. You only see something unnatural, billowing and expanding as if the atmosphere itself has been pierced. A lesser-known phenomenon occurs around you. Some people's clothing ignites briefly from the thermal flash alone. Patterns from dark-colored fabrics imprint onto skin beneath lighter garments, creating strange outlines. Light and heat have behaved almost like artists, etching patterns in ways no one could have predicted. You hear footsteps approaching. Others move as you do, unsteady, disoriented, faces coated in ash, expressions blank with shock. There is an instinctive migration beginning. Without coordination, without instruction, people drift toward open spaces, toward rivers, toward wider roads, seeking relief from fire and falling debris. You join them, not because you've calculated anything, but because staying still feels wrong. The city center looks unrecognizable. Landmarks you relied on for orientation are gone or obscured. It's like someone rearranged the map while you were standing on it. Historians still argue about how quickly word spread that this was a new type of weapon. In the immediate aftermath, even Japanese officials struggled to understand what had happened. Some believed it was a massive conventional bombing raid. Others suspected something experimental. But you don't have the luxury of speculation. You see someone stumble and reach out instinctively to steady them. Their sleeve is torn, their eyes wide. No one knows where to go. A faint wind shifts direction, pushing smoke toward the riverbanks. The sky, still blue beyond the rising cloud, looks almost indifferent. There is something surreal about how ordinary nature continues to behave. Cicadas still buzz faintly in distant trees. A single tram car, derailed and silent, rests at an angle across twisted tracks. You catch your reflection briefly in a cracked shop window. You barely recognize yourself. A strange thought crosses your mind, absurd, misplaced, but real. You were annoyed about being late this morning. Now, time feels irrelevant. You move again, step by careful step. Debris crunches beneath your sandals. Behind you, the mushroom cloud continues rising, its shape solidifying into something that will later become one of the most recognizable images in human history. In this moment, though, it's just a column of smoke reaching upward, carrying with it dust, heat, and particles you cannot see. particles that have already begun to settle invisibly on skin, in lungs, in water. You wipe ash from your brow and press forward toward the river, joining the silent procession of survivors. The city has not yet finished collapsing, and you are walking through its first breath after the blast. You move toward the river because everyone else does. It isn't a decision so much as gravity. The fires are spreading behind you, licking along wooden beams and collapsed roofs. Smoke thickens the air until breathing feels like sipping from a cup of ash. The Ota River branches through Hiroshima in multiple channels. And instinct tells you that water means safety. It always has. Fire and water, one retreats before the other. That's the rule, isn't it? You stagger down what used to be a familiar street. Landmarks are gone. The small shop with the green awning, flattened. The tram stop you passed every morning, twisted metal and splintered wood. You feel like you're walking through a sketch of your city rather than the city itself. A well-known historical fact: within minutes of the detonation at 8:15 a.m., fires erupted across wide sections of Hiroshima, eventually merging into a massive firestorm in certain districts. Wooden homes and paper interiors fed the flames quickly. You reach the riverbank and freeze. People are already there, crowded along the edge, kneeling, collapsing, leaning forward to drink or simply to cool themselves. Some have jumped into the water entirely. The heat from the blast had been so intense near the hypocenter that skin burns were immediate for those exposed directly. But even at greater distances, the air itself felt like an oven door flung open at full temperature. You kneel and dip your hands into the river. The water feels shockingly cool against your overheated skin. You press wet palms to your face. Relief. Brief but real. A lesser-known detail: many survivors later recalled an overwhelming thirst immediately after the explosion, likely due to shock, burns, and dehydration. People cried out repeatedly for water. Some accounts describe lines of survivors moving toward rivers almost silently, as if drawn by the same invisible thread. You glance around. A child stands near you, staring blankly at the water. A man nearby stumbles and collapses, his strength simply giving out. There is very little screaming. That's what unsettles you most. Not chaos, but stunned quiet. The human mind can only process so much at once. Historians still debate the precise sequence of firestorm development in Hiroshima compared to other heavily bombed cities during the war. But what remains clear is that the combination of blast damage and subsequent fires created conditions where escape routes narrowed quickly. You look back toward the city center. Smoke now rises in thick columns. The mushroom cloud has expanded, towering high into the sky, its edges rolling outward like a living thing. It casts a faint shadow across parts of the city. You don't know that radioactive particles are already beginning to descend invisibly. You only see ash drifting through the air. Someone beside you cups river water in trembling hands and drinks deeply. You hesitate for a moment. You follow. The water tastes metallic, or perhaps that's just dust in your mouth. You swallow anyway. Survival, in this moment, means immediate relief, not long-term calculation. A lesser-known phenomenon begins shortly after, what will later be called black rain. As the mushroom cloud rises, it carries soot, debris, and radioactive particles high into the atmosphere. When it cools and condenses, dark, Oily droplets begin to fall across parts of the city and surrounding areas. You notice it first as a few large drops striking the river surface. They leave faint rings before dissolving. You glance upward. The sky, once perfectly blue, now carries a gray haze near the horizon. The rain thickens slightly, dark streaks against pale skin. You hold out your hand. The droplets feel heavier than ordinary rain. They leave faint smudges. Historians still argue about the exact chemical composition and distribution patterns of the black rain, and how far contamination extended beyond central Hiroshima. Survivors in areas thought safe sometimes experienced symptoms later, complicating early assessments. You wipe your hand against your sleeve. It leaves a dark smear. You think, vaguely, that the rain looks dirty. But rain is rain. It cools your overheated skin. And for a moment, you're grateful for it. The fires behind you grow louder. A crackling roar replaces the earlier stunned silence. People begin moving again along the riverbank. Some heading downstream, others simply collapsing where they stand. You notice how slowly everyone walks, as though underwater. You glance at your reflection in the river. Ash-streaked face, eyes wide and unfocused. You are alive, still. That fact feels increasingly complicated. A man near you murmurs something about a single bomb. A rumor spreading faster than understanding. Just one. Someone repeats. It sounds impossible. Entire districts reduced by one device. But impossibility no longer feels reliable. You rise slowly from the riverbank. Your legs feel unsteady but functional. Behind you, the city burns. Above you, the cloud spreads wider. Around you, black rain continues falling lightly, tapping against water and skin with quiet persistence. You do not yet know that this rain carries invisible danger. You only know that you must keep moving. And so you walk along the river, through drifting ash and oily droplets, deeper into a world that has already changed beyond recognition. You keep walking because standing still feels like surrender. The river curves gently, but the city around it has become jagged and fractured. Bridges are damaged or crowded with survivors moving in slow, stunned lines. You pass people who look almost ghost-like, skin coated in gray dust, clothing torn or hanging loosely from burned fabric. The fires behind you merge into a steady roar. It's no longer individual houses igniting, it's entire blocks dissolving into flame. One of the most widely known historical facts is that the atomic blast destroyed or severely damaged roughly 2/3 of Hiroshima's buildings. From where you stand, that statistic is not abstract. It is visible in every direction. You hear someone call out for a relative. Another voice answers weakly. The sound travels oddly through the smoky air, muffled yet sharp at the same time. You notice something strange about some of the people around you. Their clothing hangs in tatters. But not always from torn fabric, sometimes it appears scorched in patterns. Darker sections burned away more intensely under the flash. Light and heat have behaved almost like selective artists. A lesser-known detail, survivors close to the hypocenter sometimes had the patterns of their kimono fabric imprinted onto their skin. Because darker dyes absorbed more heat. The bomb did not discriminate in intent, but physics created cruel variations in effect. You step carefully around debris scattered along the riverbank. A wooden beam floats by slowly, carried downstream. A sandal drifts past. Historians still debate the precise casualty numbers from that first day alone. Wartime chaos and destroyed records make exact counts impossible. Estimates vary widely, but tens of thousands are believed to have died immediately. You try not to calculate. You focus instead on breathing. A faint dizziness creeps in. You tell yourself it's shock, or exhaustion, or dehydration. Your body feels heavy, like it's moving through thick air. You pass a small open space where survivors have gathered, some lying flat on the ground, others sitting upright and staring blankly. There is very little organized assistance. The scale of destruction has overwhelmed any immediate response. Hospitals, those still standing, are flooded with patients. Many medical staff were killed or injured themselves. Supplies are scarce. A lesser-known fact, Hiroshima had several military and civilian hospitals. But many were either destroyed outright or rendered unusable. Medical personnel who survived often treated patients outdoors, using whatever bandages or tools they could salvage. You hear someone mention that this was not a typical bombing raid. No swarm of planes, no prolonged sirens, just one flash, one explosion. The idea feels surreal, one device reshaping an entire city. Historians still argue about how quickly Japanese officials recognized that a nuclear weapon had been used. Communication lines were damaged. Reports were fragmented. Even high-level authorities struggled to piece together what had occurred. You reach a small slope leading down toward a wider river channel. The water here is crowded. People kneel along the banks, some leaning dangerously forward. You feel an intense thirst again. Even after drinking earlier, you scoop water into your hands and drink cautiously this time. The black rain has lessened, but faint dark streaks still mark stones along the edge. You look up at the sky. The mushroom cloud now towers higher than anything you've ever seen. Its base is thick and churning. Its upper portion spreads outward in a pale, expanding dome. It almost looks beautiful from a distance. That thought unsettles you. Beauty is not supposed to follow catastrophe so closely. You glance around and notice something else. There are no birds in the sky. The usual morning sounds have vanished. No cicadas now. No distant tram bells. Just crackling fire and low human murmurs. A lesser-known phenomenon reported by some survivors was a strange, temporary silence of wildlife in the immediate aftermath. Whether due to shockwaves, heat, or simple displacement, nature paused briefly alongside humanity. You sit on a stone near the water, trying to steady your breathing. You are alive. That fact feels less triumphant and more uncertain by the minute. Your skin tingles faintly, though you can't see serious injury. You check your arms. A few small cuts from debris. Nothing catastrophic. And yet your body feels different. Historians still debate how quickly radiation sickness symptoms manifested in various survivors, and how distance from the hypocenter influenced exposure levels. Many who appeared physically uninjured in the first hours later developed severe symptoms days or weeks afterward. But you don't know that yet. Right now, you are simply a person sitting beside a river in a burning city, watching smoke blot out the sun. The water moves steadily, indifferent. The sky carries ash. And somewhere behind you, the place you once called ordinary has already become history. By late afternoon, the light changes. Not because the sun sets, but because smoke thickens until the sky takes on a bruised color. You sit by the river longer than you intended, watching shadows stretch across debris that once formed streets. The fires continue spreading. Entire neighborhoods merge into a single, rolling blaze. The heat radiates even this far from the center. You can feel it against your cheeks like an open furnace door that never closes. One of the most documented historical realities of that day is that multiple firestorms erupted across Hiroshima. Wooden homes, paper screens, and densely packed buildings created perfect conditions for flames to leap block to block. You stand slowly. Sitting too long makes your legs feel stiff and unreliable. Around you, survivors begin drifting away from the riverbank, seeking higher ground or clearer air. The city's familiar layout has dissolved. Streets are unrecognizable. Bridges are crowded or damaged. Even directions, north, south, feel abstract when landmarks are gone. A lesser-known detail, because the bomb detonated in the air rather than on the ground. Its blast radius extended farther horizontally, maximizing structural destruction while leaving a strange pattern of flattened but not cratered land below. The city appears crushed rather than gouged. You begin walking again, following a loose group of others heading toward the outskirts. There is little conversation. Words feel unnecessary. Someone nearby mutters about Nagasaki, about other cities, about whether more bombs will follow. The rumor spreads quickly, a new kind of weapon. Historians still debate the precise timeline by which Japanese authorities understood the scale and nature of the weapon used. Reports were confused at first. Some believed it was a massive conventional attack. Others suspected something unprecedented. But you are not thinking geopolitically. You are thinking about finding shelter before nightfall. You pass a building that once housed a small school. Its roof has collapsed inward. A chalkboard lies broken near the entrance. The simplicity of that image, the interrupted lesson, hits harder than statistics ever could. You pause briefly, scanning for familiar faces. You call a name softly. No answer. Your throat feels dry again. Your head aches faintly. You attribute it to smoke inhalation. It seems logical enough. A lesser-known observation reported later by some survivors was a strange metallic taste lingering in the mouth after the blast. Whether caused by dust, debris, or early radiation exposure remains debated. But you notice it now, a faint bitterness that water does not fully wash away. The mushroom cloud has begun to drift slightly with upper-level winds. It remains enormous, its base dark and turbulent. You remember the clear blue sky from the morning. It feels like a memory from another lifetime. You walk past people lying on the ground. Some conscious, others unmoving. You want to help everyone. You cannot help everyone. The scale overwhelms intention. Historians still argue about how many immediate rescues were possible given the destruction of infrastructure. Fire brigades were crippled, medical teams scattered, communication lines severed. You feel a wave of dizziness and steady yourself against a cracked wall. You close your eyes briefly, focusing on breathing in slow, deliberate rhythms. You tell yourself, stay upright. Stay moving. Night is coming. As the sun finally begins to lower, its light filters weakly through smoke, casting an eerie orange glow over the ruins. It almost looks like sunset painted in ash. A lesser-known phenomenon occurred as darkness approached, because many streetlights and buildings were destroyed. Hiroshima fell into near total darkness after nightfall. The city, once illuminated by ordinary electric glow, became a shadowed landscape punctuated only by fire. You continue walking toward the outskirts where damage seems slightly less severe. Wooden houses give way to patches of open ground and scattered trees. The air grows marginally clearer. The roar of central fires fades to a distant crackle. You reach a small clearing where survivors have begun gathering. No organized camp, just people sitting or lying where exhaustion demands. You lower yourself onto the ground carefully. The earth feels cool beneath you. You look back once more toward the city center. Smoke still rises steadily. Morning began with cicadas and sunlight. Evening ends with silence and firelight. You close your eyes briefly. Not in sleep, but in disbelief. The day is not finished. But the world you woke up in is. Night falls without ceremony. There is no gradual dimming of street lamps. No quiet hum of evening routines. Darkness arrives abruptly once the sun slips behind the smoke-streaked horizon. The city, stripped of electricity and order, becomes a landscape of shadows broken only by distant flames. You sit in the small clearing you found at dusk, surrounded by strangers who feel like companions simply because they are breathing. No one speaks loudly. The air carries the faint crackle of burning timber miles away. One of the most widely recorded facts of that first night is how unprepared the city was for what came next. With hospitals destroyed and communication lines severed, organized rescue efforts were nearly impossible. Survivors relied on instinct and proximity. You pull your knees toward your chest. The ground beneath you feels solid, reassuring in its stillness. Your body aches in unfamiliar ways, dull throbbing in your temples. Heaviness in your limbs. You assume it's shock. That seems reasonable. A lesser-known detail, many survivors described an eerie glow lingering in parts of the city after dark, not from electricity, but from widespread fires reflecting against smoke. The sky itself seemed faintly illuminated, even without stars. You glance upward. The stars are obscured by haze. The mushroom cloud, though dissipating, leaves behind a faint, unnatural ceiling of gray. Someone nearby whispers about family members still unaccounted for. Another person stares silently at their hands, turning them over as if expecting them to look different. Historians still debate the exact timing of the first radiation sickness symptoms among various groups of survivors. For many, symptoms did not appear immediately. That delay created a dangerous illusion of safety. You feel that illusion now. Aside from dizziness and thirst, you are upright. You are conscious. You tell yourself you were lucky, far enough from the center to avoid catastrophic injury. A child begins crying softly somewhere to your left. The sound carries in the still air. No one shushes them. Grief and fear do not obey bedtime rules. You lie back slowly, using your folded arm as a pillow. The ground is uneven, but exhaustion overrides comfort. The heat from the fires has lessened at this distance, replaced by a faint nighttime chill. You shiver lightly. Your skin feels tender in places you cannot fully explain. A lesser-known phenomenon. Some survivors who appeared unburned initially later discovered reddening or blistering skin hours after exposure to the intense thermal radiation. The damage was not always immediate. You lift your sleeve slightly and examine your forearm in the dim light. It looks normal enough, dust-streaked, scratched, but intact. You close your eyes again. Sleep comes in fragments. You drift briefly, then jolt awake at distant crashes as weakened structures collapse. Each sound feels amplified in the quiet. Historians still argue about how many people died during that first night due to untreated injuries or fire-related complications. Exact numbers remain uncertain, lost in chaos and incomplete records. You roll onto your side, listening to breathing around you. There is something strangely comforting about that shared rhythm. The river from earlier murmurs faintly in the distance. The sound feels ancient, indifferent to catastrophe. You think back to the morning, blue sky, routine thoughts, mild annoyance about being late. The contrast feels surreal, almost comedic in its absurdity. If someone had told you at sunrise that by nightfall you would be lying outdoors in a shattered city, you would have laughed politely and walked away. History does not announce itself politely. A faint nausea creeps into your stomach. You swallow hard, perhaps smoke inhalation, perhaps stress. A lesser-known report from some early survivors describes unexplained vomiting beginning within hours of the explosion. At the time, few connected it to radiation exposure. You sit up briefly, steadying yourself. The world tilts slightly before stabilizing. Around you, others stir restlessly. No one sleeps deeply. The fires continue burning into the night, consuming what remains. You lie back again and focus on the simplest task available. Inhale. Exhale. You are alive. That fact remains true. But something invisible lingers in the air. In the dust that coats your skin. In the rain that fell earlier. You do not know its name yet. You only know that the night feels longer than any you've lived before. Morning arrives hesitantly. The sky is pale and clouded with smoke. But the darkness of night has lifted just enough for you to see the clearing around you clearly. Survivors stir slowly, rising stiffly from the ground as if waking from a shared dream no one asked to have. You push yourself upright and immediately notice the heaviness in your body. Your muscles feel weaker than they should after a single day of strain. Your throat burns faintly. You swallow and taste bitterness again. The fires have diminished in intensity but still smolder across wide areas of the city. Columns of smoke drift lazily now, replacing the frantic roar of yesterday. One of the most widely recognized historical facts is that by the morning of August 7th, Hiroshima was largely destroyed within a radius of several kilometers. The scale of devastation became more visible as smoke thinned. You stand carefully, scanning for familiar faces in daylight. Some people you saw last night are no longer moving. Others sit upright but stare blankly at nothing in particular. A lesser-known detail: many survivors reported that birds were absent the morning after. And the usual sounds of city life, vendors, trams, factory whistles, were replaced with a strange emptiness. Silence can feel louder than noise. You begin walking cautiously back toward the city center. Not out of curiosity, but out of necessity. You need information. You need to search for family. The ground crunches under your sandals. Not with gravel but with fragments of roof tiles and shattered glass. Buildings closer to the hypocenter are flattened almost completely. Further out, structures lean at precarious angles. Historians still debate how quickly outside regions of Japan understood the magnitude of what had happened. Initial reports were fragmented. Communication lines were disrupted. As you move deeper into the city, You begin noticing something unsettling. People who seemed relatively unharmed yesterday now appear pale and weak. One man stumbles and collapses without visible wounds. A woman nearby vomits suddenly, clutching her stomach. You pause. Your own nausea from the night before returns faintly. You steady yourself against a cracked wall. A lesser-known early observation: doctors who survived noticed patients developing symptoms that did not match typical blast or burn injuries: vomiting, fatigue, bleeding from gums, sometimes days after exposure. At first, these symptoms were deeply puzzling. You approach what remains of a small clinic building. Its windows are shattered, but part of the structure still stands. Inside, medical staff work tirelessly with minimal supplies. Bandages are improvised from torn fabric. Water is rationed carefully. One of the most well-documented realities is that Hiroshima's medical infrastructure was devastated. Many doctors and nurses were killed instantly. Those who survived treated thousands under extreme conditions. You wait briefly for attention. Though your injuries appear minor compared to those around you, a nurse glances at you and nods weakly, instructing you to sit if you feel faint. You realize your hands are trembling slightly. Historians still argue about the exact mechanisms by which acute radiation sickness manifested at varying distances from the blast. Dosage levels, shielding by buildings, and time of exposure all played roles. But you do not know the term radiation sickness. You only know that people are growing weaker without obvious reason. You step back outside, feeling overwhelmed. Rumors circulate quickly: a single bomb, a new type, poison in the air. No one is certain. A lesser-known phenomenon: some survivors reported that white blood cell counts dropped dramatically in the days following exposure, leading to compromised immune systems and increased vulnerability to infection. At the time, such biological effects were poorly understood. You lean against a scorched tree trunk and close your eyes briefly. The dizziness intensifies for a moment, then eases. You remember the black rain from yesterday, the metallic taste, the tingling skin. You push the thought aside. Survival demands focus on immediate tasks. You resume searching for your family's neighborhood. Streets blur together. Landmarks no longer guide you. You find what appears to be the remains of your home district. But identifying individual houses is nearly impossible. Rubble forms uneven piles where rooms once stood. You kneel carefully, brushing aside fragments of wood and tile. Calling out names again feels futile. Yet you do it anyway. Historians still debate how many survivors spent days combing through rubble for relatives before accepting loss. The emotional toll of that search remains immeasurable. You find a familiar object, a small ceramic bowl cracked but recognizable. It anchors you briefly in reality. You hold it in your hand and feel the weight of absence. The sun climbs higher in the smoky sky. You are still standing. But something has shifted inside you. Not just shock. Not just grief. A quiet awareness that surviving the blast was only the first chapter. The invisible chapter has already begun. You do not find your family that day. You search until your legs tremble and your throat feels raw from calling names into rubble that does not answer. The city center, once mapped clearly in your mind, now resembles a charcoal sketch smudged by careless hands. By midday, the heat returns, not from explosion, but from ordinary August sun beating down on exposed ground. With so many buildings destroyed, there is little shade left. One of the most widely recognized historical facts is that temperatures in Hiroshima on August 6 and the days following remained high, compounding dehydration and exhaustion among survivors. The environment offered no mercy. You kneel beside what you believe was once your street. You recognize a stone foundation and fragments of roof tile. Everything else is indistinguishable. A lesser-known detail, in the immediate aftermath, many survivors relied on small personal objects, bowls, sandals, family charms, to confirm they were in the right place. Entire neighborhoods became visually unrecognizable within hours. You sift carefully through debris with your hands. Splinters bite into your skin. Dust coats your palms. You tell yourself that if anyone survived inside the house, they might have sought shelter elsewhere. Perhaps they fled toward the river as you did. Perhaps they are searching for you at this very moment. Hope is persistent, even when logic grows thin. Historians still debate the exact casualty distribution across different districts. Since blast intensity and structural shielding varied, people inside reinforced buildings sometimes survived closer to the hypocenter than those outdoors farther away. Survival was uneven and unpredictable. You stand slowly again. Your vision swims for a moment. You blink hard. The nausea returns more forcefully now. You swallow, steady yourself, and press forward. Near a partially standing structure, you encounter a small group organizing basic relief. Someone has managed to secure a supply of rice balls from a storage facility on the outskirts. They distribute them carefully to those who appear strongest enough to eat. You accept one, though your appetite is faint. The rice feels dry in your mouth. You chew slowly. A lesser-known early symptom reported by survivors was a sudden aversion to food despite hunger. The body, stressed beyond comprehension, resisted nourishment. You force yourself to swallow. Energy matters. Nearby, a young man collapses abruptly. There are no visible burns, no deep wounds. He simply sinks to his knees and falls forward. Two others rush to lift him. Confused. Historians still argue about how early radiation-induced blood cell depletion contributed to sudden weakness in apparently uninjured individuals. The delayed onset made the illness particularly bewildering. You watch in silence. The pattern is emerging, though no one names it yet. As the afternoon stretches on, more rumors circulate. Word spreads that the United States has used a single bomb of extraordinary power. Officials from outside Hiroshima attempt to gather information, but rail lines are damaged and communication remains fragmented. You sit beneath what remains of a tree. Its bark scorched but trunk upright. Its leaves are wilted, hanging loosely. The metallic taste in your mouth persists. You spit into the dirt and notice faint redness in the saliva. You blink, unsure if it's dust or something else. A lesser-known fact, bleeding gums and minor hemorrhaging became increasingly common among radiation-exposed survivors within days. At first, doctors suspected infection or malnutrition. The true cause would take longer to understand. You wipe your mouth and stand again. The sky above is clearer now. The mushroom cloud has thinned into drifting layers of smoke. The scale of destruction becomes more visible as haze lifts. You realize something slowly. The blast was not just localized. It was city-wide. Entire districts are gone. Historians still debate how many people were present in Hiroshima that morning. since military personnel and forced laborers increased the population temporarily. Estimates vary, complicating casualty counts further. But numbers do not help you find your family. You move again through the ruins, calling softly. The sound of your own voice feels foreign in this altered landscape. As evening approaches, exhaustion weighs heavily on you. Your limbs feel heavier than they should. You reach the river again, almost by instinct. The water still flows, steady and indifferent. You kneel and splash your face lightly. The coolness helps briefly. You look at your reflection, dust-streaked, eyes hollow with fatigue. You survived the blast. Now you are surviving the aftermath. And the second part feels less dramatic, but no less dangerous. By the third day, the city no longer roars. It murmurs. The fires have burned themselves out in many districts, leaving behind skeletal frames of buildings and ash that shifts underfoot like gray snow. Smoke lingers faintly, but the sky is beginning to look like a sky again, wide. Almost offensively normal. You move slowly now. Each step feels deliberate. Your muscles ache as though you've climbed a mountain, even though you've barely walked a few streets. One of the most widely acknowledged historical realities is that by August 8, large portions of Hiroshima were reduced to rubble, and emergency assistance from surrounding regions began arriving in limited capacity. But access was difficult. Roads were damaged. Bridges compromised. You pause near what used to be a busy intersection. The tram tracks are warped into looping shapes. You remember standing here once, impatiently waiting for a delayed car. The memory feels almost humorous in its triviality. You'd give anything now for that mild inconvenience. A lesser-known fact: some streetcar lines in Hiroshima resumed limited operation just days after the bombing. A testament to the city's urgent drive to re-establish basic function. At this moment, though, the idea feels impossible. Your nausea has intensified. It comes in waves now. You lean against a half-collapsed wall and retch, though there is little in your stomach to bring up. Nearby, others show similar symptoms: vomiting, dizziness, unusual fatigue. People who appeared stable on the first day now look pale and unsteady. Historians still debate how widely information about radiation spread among medical staff in those first days. Japan had some knowledge of radiation from earlier research, but the scale of exposure here was unprecedented. You feel something strange along your scalp, an itch or tenderness. You brush your fingers lightly across your hair. A few strands come loose more easily than they should. You frown but dismiss it. Stress does strange things to the body. A lesser-known early sign of radiation exposure was hair loss beginning within 1 to 2 weeks. For some, it started earlier. At this stage, the connection was far from clear. You sit on a stone near the remains of a building that once housed a small clinic. The windows are shattered, but volunteers have gathered inside again. They move quietly, distributing what little medicine they have salvaged. A nurse examines a patient nearby whose gums are bleeding slightly. She presses cloth gently against the mouth. Puzzled, there are no obvious injuries. The pattern grows clearer, but still unnamed. News arrives in fragments. Another city, Nagasaki, has also been bombed. That information drifts through the ruins like ash itself, settling slowly into conversation. One of the most widely known historical events is that a second atomic bomb was dropped on Nagasaki on August 9. For you, The news feels distant and yet terrifyingly close. If two cities can vanish in days, what remains secure? Historians still argue about the speed and clarity with which information about the second bomb reached Hiroshima survivors. Given communication breakdowns, but rumors move even when telegraphs fail. You stand again, feeling weaker than yesterday. The ground seems slightly unsteady, as if your inner balance has shifted. You walk toward the outskirts once more, hoping to locate a temporary shelter. Relief stations have begun forming in surviving school buildings and temples beyond the blast's core radius. A lesser-known detail, many Buddhist temples and Shinto shrines on the city's outskirts became informal refuges for survivors, offering water and shade even when medical care was scarce. You reach one such temple and lower yourself beneath its partially intact wooden gate. Volunteers move quietly among the wounded, offering water and simple rice gruel. You accept a small bowl and sip cautiously. Your stomach resists, but you force yourself to swallow. You feel cold suddenly, despite the August heat, a chill that begins deep inside your bones. Historians still debate the variability of acute radiation syndrome symptoms, why some exposed individuals deteriorated rapidly while others survived longer. Factors like shielding, time outdoors, and individual biology all played roles. You lean back against a wooden pillar and close your eyes briefly. You survived the explosion. You survived the first night. But now, in this quieter phase, something invisible is unfolding inside you. And for the first time, you begin to suspect that survival is not a single moment. It is a series of uncertain hours. You wake before sunrise beneath the temple's wooden overhang. Though, wake, might not be the right word. Sleep comes in shallow layers now, thin and interrupted. Your body feels heavier than yesterday. Your limbs resist movement. For a moment, you lie still and wonder if staying there would be easier than standing again. The air is quieter this morning. The city beyond the temple no longer crackles. It smolders. One of the most widely known historical developments occurs today, on August 9. As news of Hiroshima's destruction reaches Tokyo in fuller detail, the second atomic bomb detonates over Nagasaki. You do not see it, but the rumor reaches you in broken fragments by midday. Another city, another flash. Historians still debate how quickly and accurately Hiroshima survivors learned about Nagasaki, given the fractured communication network. But the idea of repetition settles heavily, even without precise details. You push yourself upright. Your head throbs faintly. When you bring your hand to your scalp again, more strands of hair come loose than before. You stare at them in your palm for a moment, confused. A lesser-known early sign of radiation exposure, epilation, or hair loss, often appeared days after the blast, especially among those closer to the hypocenter. At first, survivors believed it was stress, smoke, or malnutrition. You brush your hand against your sleeve and let the strands fall. Nearby, others appear weaker than yesterday. A young woman who was speaking clearly the previous evening now struggles to sit upright. An older man coughs persistently, though he shows no burns. The medical volunteers whisper among themselves. They have never seen illness behave quite like this. You stand slowly and attempt to walk toward the temple's well. The world tilts briefly, forcing you to pause and steady yourself against a wooden pillar. A lesser-known phenomenon, Many survivors reported sudden drops in blood pressure and overwhelming fatigue without external injury. Radiation had begun attacking bone marrow, reducing white blood cell production, though that explanation would only come later. You lower yourself onto a step and focus on breathing evenly. Around midday, word spreads more clearly. Japan's leaders are meeting urgently in Tokyo. Discussions of surrender, once unthinkable, are now unavoidable. Hiroshima and Nagasaki have shifted the balance irreversibly. One of the most historically significant events follows on August 15. Emperor Hirohito will address the nation by radio, announcing Japan's surrender. But today, on the 9th and 10th, uncertainty still dominates. Historians still debate the precise weight the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings carried in the final surrender decision compared to Soviet entry into the war. Political calculations layered atop unimaginable destruction. But you are not thinking in geopolitical terms. You are thinking about standing without falling. You notice faint bruising along your arms where you do not recall being struck. Small purplish marks beneath the skin. You press them gently. They ache slightly. A lesser-known effect of radiation exposure is thrombocytopenia, a drop in platelet count, leading to unexplained bruising and bleeding. But that language does not exist for you yet. Only observation. You attempt to eat a small portion of rice again. Your stomach rebels. Nausea surges sharply, and you turn away, unable to keep it down. Your body feels like it is quietly betraying you. You think back to the first flash, the blinding light at 8:15. Surviving that seemed miraculous. Now, days later, survival feels fragile in a different way. A doctor arrives from a neighboring town in the afternoon. He surveys the temple grounds. Observing symptoms among multiple survivors: hair loss, fever, bleeding gums, vomiting. He speaks softly with volunteers. Confusion evident in his posture. Historians still debate how quickly Japanese doctors connected these symptoms explicitly to radiation exposure. The scale of acute radiation sickness in a civilian population was unprecedented. You close your eyes briefly as dizziness washes over you again. The temple bells do not ring. There is no ceremony, only quiet endurance. You lean against the wooden pillar and feel a wave of cold sweep through you. Despite the humid August air, you survived the blast. But now you understand something heavier. Survival is not a single triumph. It is an unfolding uncertainty. And your body, without visible wounds, has become its own quiet battlefield. The days begin to blur together. You no longer measure time by hours, but by waves, of nausea, of dizziness, of exhaustion that settles into your bones like damp air. The temple courtyard, once a refuge, now feels like a waiting room where no one knows what they're waiting for. You sit beneath the wooden beams and notice how light filters through damaged roof panels, casting uneven patterns on the ground. Days ago, you might have admired that play of shadow. Now it feels like a reminder of fragility. One of the most historically documented realities is that within a week of the bombing, cases of acute radiation sickness surged dramatically among survivors who initially appeared unharmed. Fever, hair loss, bleeding, and extreme fatigue became widespread. You lift your hand to your scalp again. More hair loosens. It comes away gently, almost politely, as though it had decided to leave on its own. You stare at the strands resting in your palm and feel something hollow open in your chest. A lesser-known detail: survivors close to the hypocenter sometimes experienced hair loss so rapidly that clumps came out in handfuls within days. For many, this symptom became one of the first unmistakable signs that something deeper was wrong. You wrap your fingers into your sleeve and let the strands fall unnoticed to the ground. Nearby, a volunteer checks on a man whose gums bleed persistently. Cloth is pressed gently against his mouth. Another survivor lies motionless, breathing shallowly. There are no dramatic cries now, only quiet deterioration. Historians still debate how much early medical misunderstanding compounded suffering. Without full knowledge of radiation's mechanisms, treatments were limited and often improvised. You attempt to stand, but your legs tremble violently. You sink back down before you can fully straighten. A young boy sits across from you, staring at his hands in silence. His once black hair now falls loosely around his shoulders. Neither of you speak. There is nothing to explain. Word spreads through the temple grounds that Japan has surrendered. On August 15, Emperor Hirohito's voice was broadcast across the nation for the first time in history, announcing acceptance of Allied terms. You did not hear the radio clearly. The signal was faint and distorted. But the message reaches you eventually: the war is over. One of the most widely recognized historical moments, Japan's surrender, marks the official end of World War II. Yet for you, lying weak beneath temple beams, the war's end feels abstract. Your battle is internal now. Historians still argue how Hiroshima survivors processed surrender amid personal catastrophe. Relief and grief intertwined in complex ways. Victory or defeat seemed secondary to survival. You feel a sudden chill again. Fever rises behind your eyes. Sweat beads along your brow, though the air is warm. A lesser-known symptom of acute radiation exposure is a period of apparent improvement followed by a more severe phase. Some survivors felt briefly better before declining sharply. The unpredictability intensified fear. You lean your head against the wooden pillar and close your eyes. The temple bell rings softly once in the distance, not as ceremony, but as routine. The sound echoes across the courtyard, thin and fragile. You think about the ordinary morning from Section 1. The cicadas, the blue sky, your mild annoyance at being late. You survived the brightest flash in history. Now you struggle to survive its invisible echo. A doctor kneels beside you and checks your pulse. His expression remains calm, but his eyes carry quiet concern. He offers water. You sip slowly. You ask, faintly, if this will pass. He hesitates before answering gently that rest is important. Historians still debate survival rates among those with moderate radiation exposure. Some recovered gradually over months. Others deteriorated quickly. Outcomes varied widely. You focus on breathing. Inhale, exhale. The war is over. But inside your body, the aftermath has only begun. The temple courtyard grows quieter each day, not because fewer people arrive, but because more people grow too weak to speak. You sit where you have been sitting for hours, maybe days. Time slips between your fingers like ash. The wooden beams above you creak softly in the humid air. You notice small details now: the grain of the wood, the way sunlight pulls unevenly on the stone floor, because your world has narrowed to what you can see from where you rest. One of the most widely acknowledged historical facts is that by mid-August 1945, thousands of survivors were experiencing acute radiation sickness in waves. Many who had walked away from the blast without visible injury began to collapse. You attempt to lift yourself and feel a sharp weakness in your arms. It's not pain exactly. Its absence, like strength, has quietly stepped out of the room. A lesser-known effect observed in those days was a dramatic drop in white blood cell counts, leaving survivors vulnerable to infections that their bodies could no longer fight effectively. Doctors had limited tools to measure this, but they saw the consequences: fevers that would not break, wounds that would not heal. You press your palm against your forehead. It feels warm, too warm. A young volunteer offers you a damp cloth. You accept it and rest it across your brow. The relief is slight but real. Across the courtyard, someone begins reciting a quiet prayer. The words are soft and steady. You don't focus on the meaning. You focus on the rhythm. Historians still debate the exact mortality curve in the weeks following the bombing. How many deaths were immediate? How many delayed by radiation's hidden damage? The numbers fluctuate across estimates, but the pattern remains tragically clear. You shift your position slightly and feel a dull ache along your joints. When you glance at your hands, you notice faint bruises that seem darker than before. You don't remember injuring yourself. A lesser-known detail: survivors often develop spontaneous bleeding under the skin due to platelet depletion. The body, deprived of its normal repair mechanisms, began to falter in quiet ways. You swallow carefully. Your throat feels raw, though you have not been shouting. Even swallowing water requires effort. The doctor who checked your pulse yesterday returns. He kneels again, counting your breaths softly. His voice is calm. He asks if you can stand. You try. Your legs refuse. He nods gently, as though this is expected. You ask, faintly, if others are improving. He hesitates, then says that some are. It is not a lie, but it is not complete either. One of the most widely known events now shapes the nation. Japan has formally surrendered, and Allied occupation forces will soon arrive. For many, this marks the end of one chapter. For you, it marks nothing tangible. Historians still argue how much information about radiation's long-term effects was initially suppressed during the early occupation period. Research would continue, but access to public knowledge was uneven. You close your eyes and try to remember what normal felt like: walking upright, breathing deeply without effort, running a hand through hair that stayed where it belonged. You lift your hand to your scalp again and feel more strands loosen. You no longer react with surprise. The loss feels inevitable now, like leaves falling from a tree at the wrong season. A lesser-known observation recorded later by physicians was that some survivors experienced temporary improvements before entering more severe phases. The body fought quietly before conceding ground. You want to believe you are in the improving phase. You lean your head back against the wooden pillar and listen to the temple bell again. It rings softly, marking time that you can no longer measure. Around you, others lie still. Some breathe shallowly, some do not breathe at all. Volunteers move quietly, covering faces with cloth when necessary. The war has ended. But the aftershock continues, not in buildings now, but in blood and bone. You survived the flash. You survived the fire. Now you face something slower, quieter, and far more uncertain. And you do it sitting upright beneath temple beams, watching sunlight shift inch by inch across stone. The fever breaks. Not dramatically, not with a triumphant surge of strength. It simply recedes one morning, like a tide pulling back without announcement. You wake beneath the temple overhang and notice that your thoughts feel clearer. Your breathing, though still shallow, no longer burns quite as sharply. You sit up carefully, half expecting the dizziness to return immediately. It lingers, but less fiercely. One of the lesser discussed realities of acute radiation sickness is that some survivors experienced a temporary recovery phase. After the initial vomiting and fever, symptoms sometimes eased for days or even weeks before deeper complications emerged. You are in that fragile window now. Historians still debate how predictable this latent phase was and whether early physicians recognized it as a deceptive calm before more severe decline. For many survivors, the improvement inspired cautious hope. You test your strength by standing. Your legs tremble, but they hold. You steady yourself against the temple pillar and take one slow step forward. It feels monumental. Around you, not everyone has improved. The courtyard is quieter than before, not because peace has settled, but because some voices have disappeared entirely. Volunteers move gently, respectfully. There are no loud announcements, only small acknowledgments of absence. You step outside the temple gate for the first time in days. The air feels different, less smoky, more like ordinary August. The city remains shattered. Buildings stand like hollow frames. Streets are coated in fine gray dust that clings to your sandals. But there is movement now, organized movement. One of the most widely recognized historical developments in the weeks after the bombing was the arrival of outside relief efforts. Military personnel, doctors from neighboring regions, and eventually occupation forces began assessing damage and assisting survivors. You see a group of uniformed officials moving through a nearby street, taking notes, surveying destruction. Their expressions are difficult to read, professional, contained. A lesser-known detail, in the immediate aftermath, Japanese scientists and physicians began collecting data on radiation effects. Though resources were limited and conditions chaotic, early medical documentation in Hiroshima would later become foundational for understanding nuclear exposure. You walk slowly toward what used to be your neighborhood again. Each step requires conscious effort. But the fact that you can walk at all feels like quiet victory. You pass a small group clearing debris from a partially standing house. They work methodically, without conversation. Reconstruction begins not with grand plans, but with single boards lifted, single stones moved. Historians still debate how long it truly took Hiroshima to transition from shock to rebuilding. Official reconstruction plans would take time, but informal recovery began almost immediately, because it had to. You reach the site of your former home. The rubble remains largely undisturbed. You kneel carefully and brush aside ash once more. You find nothing new. And yet, standing there now, you feel something different. Not hope exactly, not acceptance either, something steadier. You survived. That fact is no longer just immediate, it's unfolding. You touch your scalp again. Hair is thinner now, patchy. You no longer flinch at the loss. It feels like a visible mark of something invisible. A lesser-known social consequence begins forming quietly during these weeks. Survivors of the bombing, later known as hibakusha, would face discrimination in employment and marriage due to fears of lingering illness or genetic damage. But that chapter has not yet revealed itself to you. For now, survival is physical. You stand once more and look toward the skeletal outline of the industrial promotion hall in the distance, its dome partially intact amid devastation. That structure, later known worldwide as the atomic bomb dome, stands as silent witness. Historians still argue about the decision to preserve that building in later years as a memorial rather than demolish it entirely. Symbolism would evolve over decades. You inhale slowly. The air carries less ash today. You survived the worst of the immediate illness. But you know now, quietly, instinctively, that survival is not a clean line. It bends. And you are walking along it, step by fragile step. You begin to measure your strength in small distances. From the temple gate to the edge of the street. From the street to the riverbank. From the riverbank back again without needing to sit. Each stretch feels like reclaiming territory, not from an enemy you can see, but from the weakness that settled into your bones. The city remains altered beyond recognition. Entire districts are flattened into pale, dusty fields where streets once threaded between homes. Yet movement is increasing. One of the most widely documented historical realities is that within days of the bombing, surviving city officials began organizing emergency responses despite catastrophic loss of infrastructure. Water lines were repaired in some areas. Temporary shelters were formalized. You pass a group of workers clearing rubble from a tram line. It seems almost absurd. Why repair a tram in a city without buildings? But then you realize, transport means connection. Connection means survival. A lesser-known fact, Hiroshima's streetcar system resumed limited operation astonishingly quickly, some lines running again just days after the bombing. It became a quiet symbol of resilience. You pause to watch them lift twisted metal carefully. Their movements are slow but deliberate. Historians still debate how much of early rebuilding was driven by morale versus necessity. In a shattered city, visible progress mattered psychologically as much as practically. Your body still feels fragile. Your appetite has not fully returned. You eat small portions of rice and vegetables when available, forcing nourishment into a system that resists it. You notice bruising fading slightly along your arms. Your gums bleed less frequently now. You lift your hand to your scalp and feel sparse regrowth, soft, uneven stubble where hair once fell away. It surprises you, life insisting quietly. A lesser-known observation from early physicians. Some survivors with moderate radiation exposure began showing signs of recovery after several weeks, though long-term complications remained uncertain. At the time, doctors could not predict outcomes with confidence. You walk toward the river again, not because of fire now, but because water still steadies you. The Ota River flows as it did before, steady, indifferent to politics and physics alike. You kneel and wash your hands slowly. The metallic taste that lingered in your mouth has dulled somewhat. Historians still argue about how far radioactive contamination spread through water systems and how long residual exposure remained significant. Initial understanding was incomplete, and protective measures were limited. You sit on a stone and watch a small group of children splash cautiously near the bank. Their laughter is tentative but real. It startles you. The war is over. Japan has surrendered. Allied occupation forces are arriving gradually, reshaping political structures even as physical rebuilding begins. One of the most widely known post-war developments is that Hiroshima would become a focal point of international attention, both as a symbol of devastation and as a site of scientific study. But from where you sit, it is simply your city, scarred and breathing. You stand again and walk toward the skeletal outline of the Industrial Promotion Hall. Its dome remains partially intact, rising strangely above flattened surroundings. It feels almost like a relic from another world. Historians still debate whether its survival was structural coincidence or the result of the blast's angle and detonation height. Physics. Again, making choices without intent. You stop a short distance away and look up at it. Wind moves faintly through exposed beams. You think about the first flash, the brilliance that erased shadows into stone. You think about the temple courtyard, the fever, the hair in your hands. You survived the immediate illness. But survival now carries weight beyond the body. You are no longer simply someone who endured an explosion. You are someone who will carry its memory forward, whether you want to or not. You turn away from the dome and begin walking back toward the temple. Each step is steadier than the last. The city is not healed. Neither are you. But both of you are still here. Strength returns unevenly. Some mornings you wake feeling almost stable, able to sit up without the room tilting, able to stand without clutching the nearest pillar. Other mornings, your limbs feel like borrowed things, unreliable and heavy. You have begun sleeping indoors again, inside a partially repaired structure near the temple. The wooden beams still smell faintly of smoke, but the roof offers shelter from rain and sun alike. One of the most historically significant developments of these weeks is the formal arrival of Allied occupation forces in Japan. By early September 1945, American troops land and begin restructuring the nation politically and socially. Hiroshima becomes both a symbol and a site of scientific interest. You notice unfamiliar uniforms moving through the outskirts of the city. They observe, document, photograph. Their presence feels distant from your daily struggle, yet impossible to ignore. A lesser-known detail, in the early occupation period, restrictions were placed on publishing photographs and detailed reports of the bombing's effects. Some accounts were censored or delayed, shaping how the outside world first understood Hiroshima. Historians still debate how censorship influenced global awareness of radiation sickness in the immediate post-war months. Scientific studies continued, but public narratives were carefully managed. You walk carefully toward a distribution point where food supplies are being organized. The line is longer now. More survivors have regained enough strength to stand and wait. You notice that your hair, though thin, continues to grow in uneven patches. You touch it reflexively and feel both relief and unease. Recovery feels fragile, conditional. A young woman ahead of you in line wears a scarf wrapped tightly around her head. You understand without asking. A lesser-known social reality is beginning to form quietly. Survivors will soon face discrimination due to fears of lingering radiation effects. Employers hesitate. Marriage prospects shift. Fear extends beyond the blast itself. But that stigma has not yet fully taken shape. For now, everyone here is simply surviving. You accept a small portion of rice and pickled vegetables. Your appetite is stronger than last week. You eat slowly, deliberately. Historians still argue about long-term health projections for survivors in these early months. Many physicians had no precedent for large-scale radiation exposure among civilians. Predictions ranged from cautious optimism to grim uncertainty. You finish your meal and walk again toward the river. The industrial promotion hall still stands in skeletal defiance. Its exposed dome catches afternoon light. Children run cautiously along the riverbank now. Some laugh. The sound feels unfamiliar but welcome. You kneel by the water and study your reflection. Your face is thinner. Your eyes carry a depth that did not exist before August 6th. You think about the first flash. The black rain. The fever. The hair in your hands. You survived each phase. And now, as occupation forces restructure your country and reconstruction begins in measured steps, you realize something subtle. Survival is evolving. It is no longer just about staying alive. It is about living forward. Historians still debate how Hiroshima transformed so quickly from devastation into determination. But from where you stand, the transformation is not dramatic. It is gradual, almost stubborn. A board lifted, a tram repaired, a meal eaten, a step taken without dizziness. You rise from the riverbank and walk back toward your temporary shelter. The city breathes differently now, not with fire or smoke, but with effort. And you, still fragile but upright, breathe with it. Weeks pass. Though you do not mark them on a calendar, you mark them in strength. How far you can walk. How long you can stand. How steady your hands remain when you lift a bowl of rice. The city around you is shifting from shock to structure. Wooden frames rise where rubble once lay untouched. Makeshift markets begin appearing along partially cleared streets. Someone hangs laundry between two beams that survived the blast. The sight feels almost rebellious. One of the most historically significant post-war developments is the gradual organization of formal medical research into the bombing's effects. Japanese physicians, along with later international teams, begin documenting symptoms carefully. Hiroshima becomes a site of study as much as a site of mourning. You notice a group of doctors moving methodically between shelters, recording observations. They examine scalps, check pulses, ask questions about the first day, the flash, the rain, the nausea. A lesser-known detail: early research teams struggled to define radiation dosage exposure accurately because personal monitoring devices did not exist for civilians. Much of the data came from survivor testimony and symptom progression. You sit on a low step outside your shelter and allow a doctor to examine your hands. The bruising has faded. Your gums no longer bleed. Your fever has not returned. He nods cautiously. Improvement. Historians still debate how wide the range of long-term outcomes would ultimately be. Some survivors would live decades. Others would develop leukemia or cancers years later. The uncertainty lingered like a shadow stretching far beyond 1945. You run your fingers through your hair again. It is short and uneven, but thicker than before. You almost smile. Nearby, a streetcar rattles faintly along a repaired track, the sound startling in its normalcy. It is one of the lines restored surprisingly quickly after the bombing. A practical step that became symbolic of resilience. You walk toward the river once more. The industrial promotion hall remains standing, skeletal and silent. Its dome frames open sky where walls once stood. Historians still argue about how the building survived structurally when so many around it collapsed. The bomb's angle and airburst height spared its core frame even as it gutted its interior. You stop at a distance and study it. It no longer feels only tragic. It feels instructive. The war is over. Occupation forces have begun implementing reforms, new laws, new political frameworks. Japan itself is shifting under external supervision. But for you, the transformation is internal. A lesser-known social development begins quietly in these months. Survivors start recognizing one another, not just by symptoms, but by shared experience. A word will emerge later, hibakusha. At first, it is not formal. It is simply recognition in the eyes. You notice it when you pass a woman with thinning hair like yours. You nod slightly. She nods back. No words required. Historians still debate how early survivors began organizing for support and medical recognition. The process was gradual, shaped by both stigma and solidarity. You sit near the riverbank and feel sunlight on your face. It is warm, but not punishing. The metallic taste that haunted your mouth has faded entirely now. Children run past you, chasing each other with sticks. One stumbles and laughs. You watch them and realize something profound. The city is not waiting to heal. It is healing while still broken. You stand slowly and test your balance. Solid. The invisible chapter that began after the flash has not ended, but it has shifted. You are no longer lying beneath temple beams counting breaths. You are walking. And the city, fragile and scarred, walks with you. Autumn begins to edge quietly into the air. You notice it not in leaves at first, but in temperature. The mornings slightly cooler, the evenings less heavy with August humidity. The change feels almost gentle compared to what you have endured. The city continues rebuilding in small, determined increments. Wooden beams rise. Roof tiles are stacked carefully in neat piles. A few storefronts reopen with limited goods. The act of commerce feels almost ceremonial. One of the most historically significant shifts in these months is the formal establishment of occupation authority under General Douglas MacArthur. Political reforms begin reshaping Japan's governance, constitution, and military structure. The nation itself is being rebuilt alongside its cities. But your focus remains local. You walk farther each day now, strength returning in cautious layers. Your hair has grown enough that the patches are less obvious. You no longer feel the chill in your bones that once startled you in August. A lesser-known reality begins surfacing among survivors, whispers of discrimination. Employers quietly hesitate to hire those visibly affected. Some families worry about future illness or inherited damage. Fear lingers beyond physical recovery. Historians still debate how deeply stigma shaped the lives of early hibakusha, especially before long-term medical research clarified risks. Social anxiety often preceded scientific certainty. You encounter a former co-worker near a makeshift market stall. He looks at you, then at your hair, then back at you. His smile is polite but guarded. You recognize the hesitation immediately. You nod anyway. Survival does not guarantee understanding. The industrial promotion hall still stands along the river, now increasingly recognized as a visual reminder of what occurred. Some argue it should be torn down to erase painful memory. Others insist it must remain. Historians still debate the early conversations around preserving ruins as memorials versus clearing them entirely for fresh rebuilding. Memory competes with momentum. You sit on a low stone near the river and watch workers carry lumber across a temporary bridge. The rhythm of rebuilding has its own quiet music now: hammer strikes, saw cuts, measured voices. A lesser-known medical observation surfaces in local clinics. Some survivors who appeared stable begin experiencing delayed symptoms, fatigue returning, unexplained fevers, subtle abnormalities in blood tests. Recovery remains uneven and unpredictable. You feel your pulse and count silently. Steady. You close your eyes briefly and remember the temple courtyard, the fever, the hair in your palm, the doctor's cautious expression. You survived that phase, but you understand now that survival is not linear. Occupation officials continue surveying the city. Photographers document ruins. Scientists collect data. Hiroshima has become both a wound and a warning. One of the most widely recognized global consequences of the bombing is the beginning of a new era, the nuclear age. The world now knows a weapon capable of erasing cities in a single flash. Historians still argue whether that knowledge deterred future wars or simply escalated global tension. You open your eyes and watch a child carefully plant a small tree sapling near the riverbank. It looks fragile against the wide, scarred earth. You almost laugh softly, not at the act, but at its audacity, planting something permanent in a place so recently undone. You stand and brush dust from your hands. Your body carries invisible marks. Your memory carries visible ones. But you are upright. And autumn, soft and persistent, is arriving whether history feels ready or not. Autumn deepens, and with it comes a strange clarity. The air cools enough that your breathing feels lighter, less weighted by humidity. Leaves along the outskirts of the city begin to turn faint shades of gold and rust. The transformation feels almost inappropriate. How dare the seasons move on so calmly? And yet they do. You walk through streets that are no longer only rubble. Wooden scaffolding frames future walls. Market stalls operate under patched canvas. Someone repairs a bicycle with steady hands. One of the most historically significant developments in late 1945 is the formal beginning of Allied occupation reforms, land redistribution. The drafting of a new constitution. Expanded rights for women. Japan itself is being reshaped politically as Hiroshima rebuilds physically. But your world remains more immediate. A lesser-known detail begins circulating among local clinics, researchers from Japanese universities and, later, American scientific teams are organizing systematic studies of survivors. They ask questions about distance from the blast, time spent outdoors, symptoms experienced. You volunteer your story reluctantly. You describe the flash at 8:15. The black rain, the fever, the hair falling into your hands. Historians still debate how early survivor testimonies shaped the world's understanding of nuclear warfare's human cost. Without these accounts, data would remain abstract. You notice something else now: fatigue that returns without warning. Some days you feel nearly normal. Other days, your limbs grow heavy again. Recovery continues, but unpredictably. A lesser-known medical observation from this period is that radiation exposure could suppress bone marrow for extended periods, causing fluctuating energy levels long after initial symptoms subsided. Doctors could not yet fully explain the pattern. You pause by the river, watching the skeletal dome of the industrial promotion hall reflect faintly in the water. Its presence has become almost familiar, not less tragic, just integrated into the skyline. Discussions begin quietly about preserving the structure. Some argue it should remain as evidence. Others believe new construction should erase the reminder entirely. Historians still debate how much early preservation efforts were driven by local voices versus later international advocacy. Memory is political as well as personal. You sit on a stone and notice that your hair now grows more evenly. Though thinner than before, you run your fingers through it gently. It feels like proof that your body chose to stay. Nearby, a small group gathers for what looks like a prayer or memorial. Names are spoken softly, some are answered only by silence. A lesser-known social reality continues forming. Survivors begin recognizing that the shared experience sets them apart. The word hibakusha gains quiet currency. It carries both identity and burden. You stand slowly and walk toward a rebuilt street where children chase each other between wooden beams. Their laughter is louder now, less tentative. Historians still argue whether Hiroshima's rapid visible rebuilding masked deeper, long-term health struggles among survivors. Infrastructure returned faster than certainty. You stop and look at the sky. It is clear, blue, like that morning in August. The memory of the flash remains sharp, but it no longer overwhelms every thought. You survived the brightest moment of destruction. You survived the invisible illness that followed. Now you stand in autumn light, in a city that refuses to remain only ash. And you begin to understand that survival carries a second responsibility. To remember. Winter approaches again, though not with the same innocence as before. The air grows crisp, and you notice how instinctively your body reacts, tense for a moment. As if expecting another unseen shock. But this is only weather. Only season. Ordinary cold returning to an extraordinary year. You now live in a modest rebuilt structure, wooden walls, patched roof, simple floor. It is not the home you lost, but it is shelter. One of the most significant historical developments during the first post-war winter is the strain placed on food supplies and infrastructure across Japan. Cities struggle with shortages. Occupation authorities coordinate relief shipments. Ration lines remain long. You stand in one such line, breath visible in the cool air. Your strength has returned enough that you no longer fear collapsing while waiting. That alone feels like a private triumph. A lesser-known medical observation begins to emerge more clearly during these colder months. Some survivors who appeared stable in autumn develop new symptoms, persistent fatigue, infections that linger, unexplained fevers. Radiation's effects are not neatly confined to weeks. Historians still debate the long-term timeline of radiation-related leukemia cases that began appearing in higher numbers several years after the bombing. At this moment, that future remains unseen, but its seeds may already be present. You pull your coat tighter and watch snowflakes begin to fall lightly over the skeletal dome by the river. The industrial promotion hall stands silent against a pale sky, now dusted with winter. There is something almost surreal about snow covering the ruins. Softness layered over destruction. You walk slowly back toward your shelter. Careful on icy ground. Your body, though not as strong as it once was, responds reliably. No sudden dizziness. No collapsing knees. You pause briefly and touch your hair. It has grown thick enough now that strangers might not immediately recognize what you endured. But you know, a lesser-known social consequence becomes more pronounced during this period. Some marriage proposals quietly dissolve when families learn of a person's proximity to the blast. Fear of genetic damage, often exaggerated or misunderstood, shapes decisions. Historians still debate how much discrimination was fueled by incomplete scientific knowledge versus cultural anxiety about illness. For many hibakusha, stigma became a second, quieter wound. You feel it occasionally, subtle glances, hesitant questions about your health. You answer calmly, "You are here, you are standing. The war is over." But the world beyond Japan is entering a new tension. The atomic bombings mark the beginning of what historians will later call the nuclear age. Nations race to understand and replicate the weapon that changed everything in seconds. You cannot see that race directly, but you sense its weight in the way scientists and officials speak about Hiroshima, as both tragedy and turning point. Snow continues falling, covering broken foundations and newly built beams alike. You stand by the river once more and watch the water move beneath thin ice forming along the edges. Winter returns. But this time, you meet it differently. You survived the flash. You survived the fever. And now, as snow settles quietly over a city that refuses to vanish, you realize that survival is no longer about endurance alone. It is about carrying memory through seasons that keep moving, no matter what happened at 8:15 on a clear August morning. The first anniversary arrives quietly. August 6, 1946. You wake before dawn. Not because of noise, but because your body remembers the date even if the calendar did not demand it aloud. The air is warm again, summer has returned to Hiroshima, carrying cicadas and sunlight that feel eerily familiar. You step outside your rebuilt shelter and notice others doing the same. There is no official ceremony yet, as the world will later know it. But there is awareness. A collective pause. One of the most historically significant developments in the year after the bombing is the gradual recognition of Hiroshima not merely as a destroyed city, but as a symbol. Local leaders begin discussing memorialization, even as reconstruction continues. You walk toward the river where the Industrial Promotion Hall still stands. Its skeletal dome catches the morning light exactly as it did the day after the blast. Time has moved, the structure has not. A small group gathers near the riverbank. Some bow their heads, others stare silently at the water. At 8:15 a.m., someone glances at a watch. There is no siren, no bell, just a stillness that settles naturally, as if the city inhales and holds it. Historians still debate how formalized remembrance developed in the earliest years. What began as quiet local acknowledgement would grow into annual global ceremonies. But on this first anniversary, it is intimate. You close your eyes. You remember the flash, the soundless brightness, the shockwave, the black rain, the temple courtyard, the hair in your palm. Your body stands upright now. Your hair has grown back. Your appetite has returned. But memory does not fade with physical recovery. A lesser-known detail, in the first year after the bombing, medical studies of survivors intensified, with teams documenting long-term effects more systematically. Data collected during this period would shape global understanding of radiation exposure for decades. You open your eyes and watch sunlight ripple across the river. Nearby, A young boy asks his mother why everyone is quiet. She answers softly that they are remembering. You kneel and touch the water lightly. It feels cool and steady, as it did the day you fled there in confusion. Historians still argue whether the atomic bombings ultimately prevented further prolonged warfare or introduced a more dangerous era of nuclear brinkmanship. The moral debate stretches across generations. But for you, the question is simpler and heavier: how to live forward without letting memory harden into only grief. A breeze moves gently through the ruined dome's exposed frame. The structure has become more than wreckage, it is a witness. You stand slowly. Around you, people begin speaking again in low voices. Some leave flowers. Others bow once more before walking away. The city hums with rebuilding energy now. Streetcars run regularly. Markets operate. Children attend classes in newly constructed schools. Hiroshima is no longer only ash. And yet, at 8:15 each August, the city remembers the moment it changed forever. You survived the horrifying fate that unfolded here, not without cost, not without scars, but alive. As the morning sun climbs higher, cicadas resume their steady rhythm. Life continues. Indifferent and persistent. You walk away from the river with a quieter understanding. Survival is not just the absence of death. It is the presence of memory carried gently enough that it does not crush the life that follows. The second year feels different. The first year after the bombing was survival, physical, immediate, uncertain. The second year begins to feel like definition. Who are you now, beyond the blast? Hiroshima continues to rebuild with determined precision. Streets are clearer. Wooden homes stand straighter. Streetcars glide along repaired tracks with less rattle than before. Markets hum with quiet negotiation. One of the most significant historical developments in 1947 is the adoption of Japan's new constitution, reshaping the nation's political identity under Allied supervision. Article 9 renounces war as a sovereign right. The country itself begins redefining its future. You read fragments about it in posted notices and overheard conversations. The language feels formal, distant, but its implications are close. The city where you almost died is now part of a country that publicly renounces war. Historians still debate how directly Hiroshima and Nagasaki influenced the pacifist clause versus broader geopolitical shifts. But in your mind, the connection feels immediate. You find work again. Simple labor helping clear debris from an old foundation where a school will be rebuilt. Your strength has returned enough that you can carry lumber without trembling. The first time you lift a full beam without needing to pause. You nearly laugh from relief. A lesser-known social development becomes more visible. Hibakusha begin quietly forming support networks, sharing medical information and experiences. The word no longer feels whispered. It becomes an identity, sometimes embraced, sometimes resented. You notice it in conversations. Someone mentions exposure, and another nods knowingly. There is shared language now, even if science still lags behind understanding. Historians still debate how early survivor advocacy shaped later compensation laws and medical recognition. At this stage, formal policies are limited. Recognition is slow. You walk by the river one evening and see children practicing calligraphy on low wooden desks set outside. The teacher's voice carries softly in the cooling air. The sight feels almost miraculous. Ordinary education resuming in a city once reduced to silence. The Industrial Promotion Hall remains standing, increasingly discussed as a permanent memorial. Some still argue for demolition to erase painful memory. Others insist preservation ensures the world never forgets. You stand at its edge and study the twisted metal dome against sunset. It no longer shocks you. It anchors you. A lesser-known medical concern surfaces more clearly this year. Cases of leukemia begin appearing among some younger survivors. Though patterns are not yet fully recognized, doctors observe, record, and worry quietly. Historians still debate the latency period and statistical patterns of radiation-induced cancers. For survivors, the debate feels personal rather than theoretical. You touch your pulse again, a habit formed in those temple days. Steady. You sit on a stone and watch the river reflect orange sky. You think about the flash at 8:15. How it split your life cleanly in two. Before, after. But now you understand something more nuanced. There is also a third chapter. Not before, not immediately after. But what comes years later, when memory softens at the edges yet never disappears. You rise slowly and walk back toward your modest home. Street lights flicker on, electricity restored fully now. The city breathes. And so do you. Years begin to fold into one another. You no longer wake each morning expecting dizziness. Your body has stabilized in ways that once felt impossible. Strength returned, slowly and unevenly, but it returned. Hiroshima changes visibly with each passing season. New concrete buildings replace fragile wooden ones. Schools reopen fully. Businesses expand. The scars of 1945 are still visible in certain empty plots and preserved ruins. But the skyline rises steadily. One of the most historically significant developments in the early 1950s is the formal establishment of the Atomic Bomb Casualty Commission, ABCC. A joint American-Japanese research initiative studying the long-term health effects on survivors. Scientists begin collecting systematic data on blood counts, cancer rates, and genetic outcomes. You are asked to participate. You sit in a modest examination room while a physician draws blood carefully into a glass vial. The process feels clinical, almost detached. Your life reduced to measurable values on paper. A lesser-known detail, many hibakusha felt conflicted about participation in these studies. While the research advanced scientific understanding globally, critics argued that direct medical treatment for survivors was often secondary to data collection in the early years. Historians still debate whether the ABCC's approach adequately balanced research with care, particularly during its initial phases. You leave the clinic feeling both validated and unsettled. You are evidence now, a living data point in the story of the nuclear age. The Industrial Promotion Hall has officially been designated for preservation discussions. Conversations intensify about transforming it into a peace memorial. You walk by it one evening and notice tourists from other parts of Japan standing quietly before its exposed dome. Hiroshima is no longer just your city. It is becoming the world's warning. A lesser-known social tension persists, despite medical advancements. Stigma toward hibakusha remains. Marriage negotiations sometimes include questions about health history. Employers occasionally hesitate. Fear lingers longer than facts. Historians still debate how deeply discrimination shaped the economic trajectories of survivors in the decades following the bombing. For some, opportunity narrowed invisibly. You meet someone, unexpectedly. She stands by the river one afternoon, watching the water flow beneath the preserved dome. Conversation begins gently, cautiously. Both of you share fragments of experience, not graphic details. Just recognition. You notice how she glances briefly at your hairline, where regrowth once struggled. You smile faintly. You understand. Years ago, you feared you might not survive the fever. Now you find yourself discussing the future. A lesser-known medical finding begins emerging from ongoing research. Fears of widespread genetic damage among children of survivors appear less dramatic than initially assumed. Studies show no massive increase in birth defects attributable solely to radiation exposure, though anxiety remains high. Historians still debate how public perception often lagged behind scientific findings, prolonging stigma even as evidence evolved. You sit beside her and listen to the wind moving through the skeletal dome. The flash at 8:15 once defined you entirely. Now it feels like a chapter, monumental. Yes, but not the only one. You survived the horrifying fate that claimed so many. Now you are navigating something quieter. How to live fully in a city that will forever carry the memory of that morning. The river continues flowing, steady and indifferent. And you, once collapsed beneath temple beams, sit upright in late afternoon light, contemplating not just survival, but companionship. Time softens certain edges, but it does not erase them. You marry in a modest ceremony, no grand hall, no elaborate procession, just close friends and quiet vows. The river flows nearby, and the preserved dome watches from a distance like a silent witness to everything that followed that morning. For years, you wondered if marriage would even be possible. The whispers about hibakusha, about illness, about children, about uncertain futures, hung over every conversation. A lesser-known reality in post-war Japan was the intense anxiety surrounding hereditary effects of radiation. Many believed survivors would inevitably pass severe illness to their children. Scientific evidence later showed the risk was far less dramatic than feared. But fear often outruns data. Historians still debate how deeply those early misconceptions shaped social patterns. Delayed marriages, broken engagements, quiet rejections. You and your wife speak openly about it. You decide to live forward anyway. When your first child is born, you hold them with trembling hands, not from weakness this time, but from awe. The infant's cry feels like a counterargument to everything that tried to end your future. Doctors examine the baby carefully. Healthy, whole, ordinary. You exhale a breath you did not realize you were holding for years. The city itself continues transforming. Concrete buildings rise taller, schools expand. The Peace Memorial Park begins taking shape formally, incorporating the preserved dome as its centerpiece. What was once rubble becomes intentional space. One of the most historically significant developments is the formal establishment of Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park in the 1950s. Designed as both a place of remembrance and a global appeal for nuclear disarmament. You walk through the newly landscaped grounds and watch schoolchildren release paper cranes near the river. The ritual is gentle, hopeful. Historians still debate how Hiroshima's identity evolved, from victimhood to advocacy, from devastation to global symbol of peace. But standing there, you feel the shift personally. A lesser-known social movement emerges quietly among survivors, organized testimony. Hibakusha begin speaking publicly about their experiences, not to shock, but to educate. You hesitate at first. Your memories feel private, fragile. But one afternoon, standing before a small classroom of older students, you describe the flash, the black rain, the temple courtyard, the hair falling into your palm. You do not dramatize. You do not exaggerate. The room remains silent. In telling it, something inside you steadies further. Memory shared becomes less isolating. Historians still argue about the global impact of survivor testimony on anti-nuclear movements during the Cold War. But there is no debate about its emotional weight in rooms like this one. You return home and lift your child into your arms. The fear that once accompanied your survival has shifted into something else: responsibility. The nuclear age accelerates globally. Other nations test atomic weapons. The world enters a tense standoff that historians will later call the Cold War. Hiroshima becomes a reference point in speeches and protests worldwide. You stand once more by the river at dusk. The dome reflects faintly in the water. Children play nearby, laughter echoing between trees planted in once scorched soil. You survived the horrifying fate that unfolded here. You survived the invisible illness that followed. Now you live in the space between memory and motion. And the river keeps flowing, carrying the past gently forward without ever stopping. Your child grows tall enough to ask questions. Not vague ones. Not childish abstractions. Direct ones. Were you there? You sit at the low table in your home, sunlight filtering through paper screens, and realize that the story you once carried alone now belongs partly to the next generation. You nod. You explain gently. No graphic details. No fear-laden language. You describe the flash, the confusion, the sickness. You tell them how you thought you might not survive. And how you did. A lesser-known reality of the decades after 1945 is that many hibakusha struggled with when, and how, to tell their children about their experiences. Silence sometimes felt protective, but silence could also isolate. Historians still debate whether delayed storytelling intensified intergenerational anxiety or preserved emotional stability. Every family made its own choice. You choose openness. Hiroshima continues evolving into a city of memory and movement. The Peace Memorial Museum expands, displaying artifacts recovered from rubble, melted glass bottles, fused roof tiles. A watch stopped at 8:15. One of the most widely recognized historical elements of the museum is that stopped watch, its frozen hands marking the moment of detonation. It becomes an enduring symbol of time interrupted. You stand before it one afternoon. Your child beside you. The small, damaged object feels heavier than its size suggests. Historians still argue about the role of curated memory, how museums frame tragedy for public understanding. But standing there, you are not analyzing, you are remembering. A lesser-known medical development emerges in these years: increased screening programs for survivors, offering health monitoring and limited compensation. It is imperfect, sometimes bureaucratic, but it is acknowledgement. You attend regular checkups now. Blood tests, physical exams. Each visit carries a faint undercurrent of fear. What might they find this time? So far, nothing catastrophic. The Cold War intensifies globally. Nations test more powerful nuclear weapons, hydrogen bombs capable of destruction far beyond what struck Hiroshima. The irony is not lost on you. The world learned what atomic fire could do, and then built larger flames. Historians still debate whether nuclear deterrence prevented further world wars or merely sustained a different kind of global anxiety. You walk by the river in early evening. The atomic bomb dome stands illuminated now at night, intentionally preserved. Its skeletal structure no longer looks abandoned, it looks deliberate. Your child runs ahead, carefree. You pause and reflect on how close you came to not standing here at all. The fever, the weakness, the uncertainty. You survived the horrifying fate that unfolded in that instant. But survival has evolved into something else entirely. It has become witness. You place your hand gently on your child's shoulder and point toward the dome. You explain not just what happened, but why remembering matters. A lesser-known truth emerges in your own heart. Survival is not only physical endurance. It is the willingness to carry memory without letting it poison joy. The river flows steadily, reflecting city lights that did not exist in the months after the bombing. And you stand there, neither consumed by the past nor detached from it, but balanced, carefully, between both. The years gather quietly behind you. Your child is no longer a child. The city is no longer a ruin. Hiroshima has become something layered. Modern buildings rising alongside preserved fragments of memory. You walk more slowly now, not from illness, but from age. Your body, once fragile with radiation's invisible assault, has endured far longer than you dared hope during those temple days. One of the most historically significant developments in the decades following the bombing is the formal recognition and expansion of hibakusha healthcare benefits. Laws are passed providing medical assistance and modest compensation to certified survivors. You carry your identification booklet carefully in your coat pocket. It is small, bureaucratic, unremarkable, and yet it acknowledges what happened to you. A lesser-known reality is that many survivors hesitated to register formally at first. Some feared stigma. Others did not want to relive their experience through paperwork and questioning. Recognition was both validation and reopening. Historians still debate how effective government support truly was in meeting the complex medical and emotional needs of survivors. Progress was steady but imperfect. You sit in the Peace Memorial Park one autumn afternoon, watching visitors from around the world walk slowly through its paths. Some carry cameras, others bow their heads quietly. The atomic bomb dome stands as it always has, skeletal, dignified, defiant. You remember when it was simply a ruin among many. Now it is a landmark, inscribed into global consciousness. A lesser-known development unfolds over time. International delegations visit Hiroshima regularly, attending memorial ceremonies and discussing nuclear disarmament. The city becomes a diplomatic symbol as much as a historical site. Historians still argue about how much practical influence Hiroshima's symbolism has had on actual nuclear policy. Words and treaties do not always align neatly. You watch a group of schoolchildren release paper lanterns onto the river at dusk. They drift gently, tiny lights carried by steady current. You close your eyes briefly and return to that first night, the temple courtyard. The fever, the weakness so profound you wondered if dawn would come for you again. It did. Your hair grew back, your strength returned, you married, you raised a family, you watched your city rebuild. The horrifying fate that seemed to define your existence has become one chapter among many. Yet it never disappears. You still wake sometimes before August 6th each year. Heart beating slightly faster. You still feel the echo of that flash behind your eyelids when you close them too tightly. A lesser-known psychological effect among some survivors is recurring dreams or flashbacks triggered by bright light or sudden noise. Trauma lingers in subtle ways. Even when life continues. Historians still debate how collective trauma shapes urban identity across generations. Hiroshima's children inherit both grief and resolve. You rise slowly from the park bench and walk toward the riverbank. The water reflects lantern light and city glow together. You survived something designed to erase you. Now you stand in a city that chose not to be erased. The air is calm. The cicadas hum faintly in late summer warmth. And you realize that survival is no longer about what you endured, but about what you have built afterward. The decades keep unfolding, almost politely. The sharpness of memory softens at the edges, though it never truly dulls. Hiroshima becomes a city of trams, office buildings, schools, cafes. Tourists arrive not out of curiosity alone, but out of reverence. You are older now. Your hands show faint tremors, not from radiation this time, but from age. Your steps are slower, measured. One of the most historically significant global developments during your lifetime is the expansion of nuclear arsenals far beyond the bomb that fell on your city. Hydrogen bombs, capable of exponentially greater destruction, are tested during the 1950s and 1960s. The Cold War intensifies. You follow this news carefully. Every test announced feels personal. Historians still debate whether nuclear deterrence prevented large-scale war between superpowers or simply created a prolonged standoff fueled by fear. For you, the debate is not abstract. You have seen what even the smaller bomb did. A lesser-known but important reality emerges in later decades. Hibakusha travel abroad to share testimony at international peace conferences. Their presence transforms policy discussions into human stories. You are invited once to speak outside Hiroshima. You hesitate, then agree. Standing before an audience far from the river you once fled toward. You describe the flash at 8:15. You speak softly, steadily. You mention the black rain, the temple courtyard, the hair in your palm. The room is silent. Historians still debate how much survivor testimony influenced specific treaties such as the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1968. But no one debates its emotional impact. You return home afterward and sit by the river, feeling a quiet fatigue, not from illness, but from the weight of retelling. The atomic bomb dome remains preserved. Peace Memorial Park has matured into a space of reflection, trees tall, paths shaded, monuments engraved with names. A lesser-known generational shift occurs gradually. Younger residents of Hiroshima grow up with no direct memory of the blast. Their understanding is inherited, shaped by ceremony and education rather than experience. Historians still argue about how memory transforms as eyewitnesses age. What happens when those who stood beneath the flash are no longer here to speak? You walk slowly across the bridge at sunset. The river glows gold beneath you. Children play soccer in a nearby field. Laughter rises into the evening air. You pause midway and close your eyes briefly. You remember the silence after the shockwave, the unnatural stillness, Now, sound fills the city, engines, voices, bells. You survived the horrifying fate of that morning. But you also survived the quieter chapters: stigma, uncertainty, medical examinations, anniversaries heavy with memory. And now, in the later stretch of your life, survival feels less like endurance and more like stewardship. You are a keeper of a story that reshaped the world. The river keeps moving beneath the bridge, indifferent to politics, to treaties, to debates. You open your eyes and continue walking. Step by step. Your hair has gone silver now. When you look into the mirror, you no longer see the young person who walked beneath a clear blue sky on August 6, 1945. You see layers, flash, fever, rebuilding, family, testimony, stacked gently behind your eyes. Hiroshima is a modern city. Trains run efficiently. Neon signs glow at night. Office towers reflect sunlight where wooden homes once stood. One of the most historically significant shifts in recent decades is the growing global movement for nuclear disarmament. Hiroshima's annual ceremonies are broadcast internationally. Heads of state visit. Speeches echo through Peace Memorial Park. You attend each August 6 ceremony when your health allows. At 8:15 a.m., the bell rings. Silence falls. The moment stretches. Identical in time but utterly transformed in meaning. Historians still debate whether symbolic remembrance meaningfully alters global nuclear policy. But symbolism shapes consciousness. And consciousness shapes choices, even if slowly. A lesser-known but powerful development is the inclusion of survivor testimony in school curricula worldwide. Children in distant countries learn about the flash, the black rain, the temple courtyard, about you, though they do not know your name. You sit on a bench in Peace Memorial Park, cane resting lightly beside you. The atomic bomb dome stands as it always has, unchanged, intentional, protected. Your grandchildren sit near your feet, asking questions that echo the ones your child once asked. Were you afraid? You consider the question carefully. You explain that fear was there, but confusion came first. Then survival, then responsibility. A lesser-known emotional truth among many hibakusha is that survivors' guilt lingers quietly for decades. Why you? Why not someone else? The mind searches for logic where none exists. Historians still debate how survivors' guilt manifests across generations and cultures. But sitting here, you feel it as a faint, familiar weight, not overwhelming, but present. You watch your grandchildren run toward the river, chasing pigeons with careless joy. The river glints under late summer sunlight. You close your eyes briefly and return to that first night, the cold temple floor. The weakness so complete you believed dawn might not come. It did. And then another, and another. You open your eyes again and realize that survival has outlasted expectation. The horrifying fate that seemed absolute in 1945 did not end you. It reshaped you. The city reshaped itself. And now, in the later years of your life, you sit quietly as others carry the story forward. The cicadas hum. The bell will ring again next year. And the river, constant and patient, continues to move. The years thin gently, like pages at the end of a long book. You wake earlier now, not from fear, but from habit. Dawn light filters softly through your window, touching the edges of photographs arranged on a small wooden shelf, your wedding day. Your child as a toddler. Your grandchildren standing beneath the atomic bomb dome. The city outside your window hums with ordinary life. Trains glide across bridges. Office workers hurry past cafes. Tourists consult maps in Peace Memorial Park. Hiroshima is no longer defined by smoke. It is defined by motion. One of the most historically significant global shifts in recent years is renewed debate over nuclear treaties, agreements signed, challenged, reaffirmed. Hiroshima is cited again and again as proof of consequence. Historians still debate whether the world truly learned the right lessons from August 6. The existence of thousands of nuclear weapons suggests complexity. Yet the absence of their use since 1945 suggests restraint. You move slowly through your morning routine. Your hands tremble slightly when pouring tea. But not from illness. Age has replaced radiation as the dominant force shaping your body. A lesser-known truth about many hibakusha in later life is that they often outlived their own expectations. In the early years, many believed they would not reach old age at all. The long future felt uncertain, fragile. You once felt that too. Now you sit by the river once more. Cane resting against your knee. The atomic bomb dome stands across the water, framed by trees planted decades after the blast. It looks less like a wound and more like a reminder. Children on a school trip gather nearby, listening to a guide explain what happened at 8:15 a.m. on August 6. 1945. You catch fragments of the explanation: airburst, black rain, radiation sickness. You close your eyes briefly. Those words once described your immediate present. Now they describe history. Historians still debate how memory evolves when first-hand witnesses grow fewer. What remains when testimony becomes text? You understand the answer quietly. Memory remains in intention, in preserved ruins, in annual bells, in paper cranes folded by hands that never felt the heat of that flash. Your breathing is steady, slower now, but even. You survived the horrifying fate of that morning. You survived the fever, the weakness, the uncertainty of blood tests and long shadows of stigma. You survived long enough to see grandchildren run freely beneath summer skies that no longer carry smoke. The river moves gently before you, reflecting sky and dome alike. You lean back slightly on the bench and allow your thoughts to soften. The flash no longer dominates every memory. It is present, but it does not eclipse everything else. There were weddings, laughter, seasons, arguments, small joys. Survival expanded beyond endurance into living. And as afternoon light warms the park, you sit quietly, not as a symbol, not as data, not as tragedy, but as a person who remained. Your steps grow slower, but your mind remains clear. You return home after your walk along the river, lowering yourself carefully into your chair near the window. From here, you can see the edge of the city skyline, glass, steel, movement. It hums with life that once seemed impossible. Your grandchildren visit more often now. They bring school assignments about peace, about nuclear disarmament, about history. Sometimes your name appears in their essays, not fully, but as, "My grandfather was there." You smile at that phrasing, "was there," as if it were a location rather than an event that split time itself. One of the most historically significant developments in recent decades is the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Adopted by many nations seeking to eliminate nuclear arms entirely, Hiroshima's memory is cited in speeches at the United Nations. Historians still debate whether such treaties will ever achieve universal participation. Political realities move slower than moral appeals. You sit quietly and listen to cicadas outside your window. Their rhythm is steady, unchanged from that August morning decades ago. A lesser-known emotional truth among aging hibakusha is a quiet anxiety about what happens when their voices are gone. The fear is not of death itself, it is of forgetting. You once feared not surviving the fever. Now you fear memory fading. Your child, now grown, with children of their own, sits beside you one evening. They ask if you regret anything. You consider the question carefully. You regret the lives lost. You regret the morning interrupted. But you do not regret surviving. Survival allowed you to love, to raise a family, to speak. Historians still debate the moral dimensions of atomic warfare, the calculus of war's end versus human cost. You leave that debate to scholars. For you, the truth is simpler. You stood beneath a sky that split open. You lay beneath temple beams unsure if dawn would return. And you lived. You close your eyes and feel the warmth of evening sunlight across your face. The atomic bomb dome still stands by the river, preserved and illuminated each night. It has outlived architects' expectations, outlived political eras, outlived many who stood near it that morning. You know your time will also pass. That is not tragedy, it is rhythm. The horrifying fate that once defined you has become a story entrusted to others. You lean back in your chair and breathe slowly, evenly. The city outside continues, traffic lights changing, trains crossing bridges, children laughing somewhere beyond your window. And you, once certain that your life would end in that August heat, sit calmly in a world that moved forward. The river keeps flowing. And so did you. The mornings are quieter now. You wake before the sun fully rises, the light entering your room in pale blue layers. For a moment, just a moment, you are back in August 1945. The air feels still, the cicadas are faint, your heart beats a little faster. Then you open your eyes fully. And you are here, in your home, in a city rebuilt. Your body is thin now, bones more visible beneath skin that has weathered decades. Age has taken what radiation once threatened. There is a strange peace in that symmetry. One of the most historically significant transformations over your lifetime is that Hiroshima has become a global center for peace education. The annual ceremony on August 6 draws leaders, students, activists from around the world. What began as devastation became dialogue. Historians still debate whether humanity has truly absorbed the lesson of that morning. Nuclear weapons still exist, tensions still rise and fall. Yet the fact that they have not been used again in war since 1945 is something many argue is itself a fragile, cautious victory. You sit up slowly in bed and swing your legs toward the floor. Even that small motion requires patience. You think about the flash, brighter than anything human eyes were meant to see. You think about the shock wave, the black rain, the temple courtyard, the hair falling into your palm. You survived. Not everyone did. A lesser-known emotional truth among many survivors in their final years is a complicated mixture of gratitude and sorrow. Gratitude for the years granted. Sorrow for those denied them. The two feelings coexist quietly, without resolving into one. Your family gathers around you more often now. They know your strength is no longer what it was. They speak gently. They laugh easily. They do not treat you as fragile glass. You appreciate that. You ask to be taken once more to the river. It takes effort, but they help you into a chair near the water's edge in Peace Memorial Park. The atomic bomb dome stands before you. Unchanged, deliberate, dignified. Its skeletal frame cuts into the sky. Not as accusation, but as reminder. Children run nearby. Paper cranes flutter in small clusters tied to railings. The bell tower stands ready for the next August ceremony. You close your eyes. The river moves softly. The wind brushes your cheek. You realize something profound in this stillness. The horrifying fate of that morning did not end your story. It began a different one. A story of endurance, of rebuilding, of testimony, of love carried forward. Historians will continue debating causes, consequences, morality, geopolitics. Scholars will analyze casualty numbers, treaty negotiations, deterrence theory. But you know the truth in simpler terms. At 8:15 a.m., the world changed. And you remained. Your breathing slows. The cicadas hum gently in late summer warmth. The river continues, steady and patient. You are not afraid now. The flash is memory, not present. You have carried it long enough. Your family's voices blend softly around you, like wind through leaves. The city stands. The dome stands. And the story, your story, has already been passed forward. You rest your head back and allow the warmth of sunlight to settle over you. No longer blinding, no longer violent, just light. Quiet, gentle. Enough. End of script. Sweet dreams.